A chill wind rattled the shutters of the narrow, stone-walled chamber, its fingers slipping through every crack and crevice, carrying with it the metallic tang of blood and the acrid bite of burning herbs. Torches clung to the walls like stubborn fireflies, their light trembling against the rough-hewn stone, casting long, writhing shadows that danced across the floor. Clay pots toppled at the edges of the room. Iron tools lay scattered like forgotten instruments of fate, and every surface seemed soaked with the weight of unspoken suffering. The air was thick and heavy, pregnant with the scent of sweat, smoke, and copper. The copper of old wounds, of lives hanging on the edge between survival and death. Kneeling over a patient, the healer moved with a practiced tenderness, lips murmuring prayers that trembled into whispers, as though the walls themselves might listen. Fingers, thin and trembling, pressed poultices to a fevered brow, feeling the heat that could scorch life itself. The patient's breaths were shallow, shallow enough to be mistaken for whispers of the dying, and every rise and fall of the chest seemed both miraculous and fragile. Outside, a monastery bell tolled in the distance, its hollow clangs cutting through the chill night, each reverberation marking the relentless passage of hours, each one a reminder of mortality. The healer's eyes, wide and haunted, flicked from patient to patient, from shadow to shadow. They reflected the weight of countless failures, the memories of those who had been lost to wounds, to fevers, to fate's cruel arbitrariness. There was a deep, unspoken knowledge that skill was not enough, that even the sharpest mind and the steadiest hand could bend before the unforgiving currents of life and death. Every remedy was a gamble, every poultice a hope that might either soothe or betray. A rope coiled in the corner caught the torchlight, and for a moment, its purpose seemed both ominous and ambiguous. Punishment for the defiant, restraint for the afflicted, or perhaps a grim tool in the unpredictable theater of medicine. Candle smoke rose in lazy spirals, curling into the rafters, forming a ghostly veil between life and death, between hope and despair. The room itself seemed alive with tension, the walls bearing witness to centuries of whispered fears, secret remedies, and the desperate clutching at survival. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of unseen spirits, shaking the stones and rattling the torches, and the faint squeak of the shutters seemed almost human. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, a cart groaned under the weight of supplies, or perhaps of corpses awaiting the mercy of burial. Within the chamber, the healer's hands moved with relentless determination, rinsing tools in boiling water, crushing herbs with a rhythm learned through years of repetition and sorrow. The hiss of water mingled with the patient's labored breathing, creating a symphony of fragile life and imminent death. There was no room for hesitation. Each gesture was a delicate negotiation with fate. A drop too much, a touch too harsh, and life might slip away silently into the cold embrace of the stone floor. Yet, in the trembling movements, there was a grace, a devotion that seemed almost sacred. The healer whispered names that might not belong to the living, invoked blessings that might fall unheard, and laid hands over wounds with the reverence of a priest performing a rite older than memory itself. The walls of the chamber seemed to shrink as the night deepened. Shadows coiled like living things, pressing close to the flickering torchlight, reminding all who lingered within that the world beyond was merciless. The patient's fevered murmurs rose and fell in rhythm with the wind, a fragile cadence that threatened to break at any moment. The smell of herbs, sage, thyme, rosemary, clung to the air, a sharp, bitter perfume meant to soothe the body, if not the soul. And always, beneath it all, the omnipresent scent of copper and iron, the memory of injury, of blood, of lives balanced precariously on a knife's edge. In this crucible of smoke and shadow, the healer moved with careful decisiveness, performing rituals that blurred the line between science and superstition. Poultices were pressed, linen bandages wrapped, the soft brush of fingertips over burns and sores, the gentle tug of cloth against raw skin. In each motion, there was an intimacy born of necessity and desperation, a closeness that could terrify as much as it could comfort. Fear hovered over every act of care, a specter whispering that even the best-intentioned hands might fail. Time passed with a slow, merciless insistence. The monastery bell tolled again, each chime reverberating through the bones of the chamber, through the very marrow of the healer and patient alike. It marked not just hours, but the rhythm of life and death, a reminder that nothing within these stone walls existed beyond the reach of fate. The healer paused to breathe, their chest rising and falling with a weariness that carried decades of struggle. They could almost feel the eyes of the past upon them, the ghosts of those who had succumbed despite all efforts, and the shadows of mistakes that had carved themselves into memory. Yet hope persisted, stubborn and fragile, like a candle flickering against the draft of an endless night. Even in the dim light and the thick air, life clung tenaciously. A finger twitched, a hand flexed slightly, and the healer's heart caught in a mixture of relief and fear. Each small sign of vitality became monumental, each shallow breath a victory snatched from the jaws of despair. In this room, where death's presence was palpable, the quiet persistence of life was miraculous. And as the night pressed on, the chamber became a sanctuary of fragile miracles, of whispered prayers, and of the relentless pursuit of salvation in a world that offered little. The healer's eyes, though haunted, shone with a fierce determination, a refusal to yield to the cold inevitability beyond the walls. Outside, the wind continued its mournful lament, and the shadows continued their restless dance. But within the stone chamber, time was suspended in the fragile rhythm of tending and surviving. A final curl of candle smoke drifted upward, dissolving into the darkness, and in its ghostly path, it seemed to carry with it both the weight of countless failures and the fragile promise of life. The patient's chest rose, shallow but steady, and the healer allowed a breath they had not realized they were holding. This intimate vigil, this suspended dance between life and death, marked the beginning of a deeper journey into the hidden horrors and desperate remedies of medieval medicine. A world where every act of healing could mean salvation or catastrophe, where courage was measured in trembling hands, and where the line between life and death was drawn in the faint, flickering light of a torch. And as the bell tolled once more, echoing across stone and shadow, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the wind whispered of trials yet to come, of suffering unseen and secrets waiting to be uncovered. The healer straightened slowly, eyes lingering on the patient, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the fragile rhythm of survival, poised on the knife edge between despair and hope. Here, in this small, flickering sanctuary, the story of healing, fear, and human endurance began its inexorable march forward. Dawn seeps through latticed windows, spilling pale gold over the cold stones of the scriptorium. The air trembles with the quiet hiss of ink on vellum as a young apprentice bends over a desk, his fingers smudged with the black tang of knowledge. Each stroke of the quill is deliberate, tracing the recipes of healers long dead, their voices whispering across centuries, murmuring secrets of herbs and roots, of powders and poultices. The scent of dried thyme and marigold mingles with the sharp, metallic bite of ink, a strange perfume of hope and dread. Outside, the city stirs. The clang of iron gates echoes through narrow streets, punctuated by the cries of merchants hawking onions, garlic, and strange trinkets. Yet the usual bustle feels muted, as if the life of the square has already begun to flee before some unseen malady. From the scriptorium's high window, the apprentice watches a small bird tethered to a string, hopping nervously across the courtyard. It chirps once, a fragile, tremulous sound, tethered to its fate, a witness to the trials of faith and cure alike. The master physician glides through the room, robes brushing the cold, damp stones with a whisper of ritual. His eyes are shadowed beneath furrowed brows, the weight of centuries of healing and harming etched into the lines of his face. He pauses, dips a finger into a murky vial, and lifts it to the light. The liquid sloshes, a dark promise of relief or ruin. The apprentice leans closer, feeling the tension coil like a serpent in his chest. Each potion carries the risk of salvation or death. Each mixture, a delicate balance of knowledge and superstition. The room breathes with hidden fear. Candles flicker as though shivering from some unseen wind, and their dancing flames cast shadows that stretch and twist across the walls. Faces of the past emerge in the wavering light. Patients who vanished into fevered nights, villagers whose trust was betrayed by remedies gone wrong. The faint imprint of despair left in stone and parchment alike. The apprentice shivers, sensing the weight of failures unrecorded, of cures kept secret, of the invisible hand of superstition guiding every measured dose. He touches the edge of a shelf, brushing against bundles of drying herbs. Lavender, sage, and belladonna, tied with twine, their earthy scent sharp against the faint sweetness of the parchment. Each bundle tells a story. A mother who prayed for a child's breath, a man gasping for life under the shadow of a pestilence, a healer's trembling hands holding hope in the palm of a shaking hand. Outside, the city's clamor grows louder, but inside, the apprentice inhabits a different world, a liminal space where knowledge and fear wrestle in silence. The master moves toward a table where a shallow bowl catches drops of a reddish-brown tincture. He whispers something that catches in his throat, a fragment of an incantation or perhaps a muttered caution, and the apprentice leans in, straining to hear. The words are lost to the crackle of the candle and the distant clamor beyond the scriptorium walls, yet the meaning settles heavily. Every cure carries a shadow. Every remedy is both a lifeline and a gamble. A draft slips through the open window, rattling the papers, sending a whiff of the marketplace into the room. The scent of wet stone, bread, and the acrid tang of smoke from early cooking fires. The apprentice shivers again, but his fingers keep moving, guided by a compulsion older than himself. Each word he inscribes is a thread weaving the fragile tapestry of human endurance, a record of attempts to wrest mastery from a world ruled by disease, ignorance, and fear. He glances at the tethered bird again. It hops closer to the edge of its perch, tilting its head as if questioning the apprentice's presence, or perhaps the very nature of survival itself. The apprentice wonders if the bird, in its tiny, constrained life, feels the same dread and anticipation that clings to the healer's work. There is a strange kinship in their fates, both bound to forces beyond comprehension, both caught in cycles of hope and despair. The master turns, the hem of his robe whispering against stone, and fixes the apprentice with a look that carries the weight of unspoken lessons. One day, he says, voice low and edged with gravity, you will learn that healing is not merely the art of curing flesh. It is the art of surviving the cruelty of ignorance. The apprentice nods, though his mind reels with the enormity of what he is being entrusted to preserve. Each note he records is a lifeline, each tincture a fragile pact with forces that will neither bend nor forgive. Outside, a bell tolls across the city. The sound vibrates through the scriptorium, shaking dust from beams, a reminder of the world beyond these walls. A world of commerce, gossip, and the ceaseless struggle to endure. The apprentice's eyes sweep the shelves once more, tracing the jagged edges of jars, the rough lines of parchments, the hidden stories held in silence. Shadows stretch across the room, lengthening into the corners where fear and knowledge converge. A candle guttering casts a fleeting image of a man hunched over a patient, his hands trembling, his prayers unheard. The apprentice imagines himself in that posture, the weight of responsibility pressing down like the stones overhead, the echo of every failed cure lingering in the cold air. The bird chirps once more, a fragile punctuation in the thick, suffocating quiet. And for a moment, he feels the strange tethering of life itself, the delicate line between hope and ruin, the thin thread that binds the living to the dead. The master moves toward the window, lifting the curtain to peer at the sun's slow ascent over the city. Light spills across stone and cobblestone, igniting the world outside in a brilliance the scriptorium rarely feels. Yet even in this morning glow, the apprentice senses the shadows within, the lingering fear, the whispered secrets, the silent testimony of suffering etched into every page, every vial, every dried herb. He takes a deep breath, inhaling the scent of ink, of root, of early morning. And in that breath he carries a fragile resolve. The path ahead is perilous. Knowledge must be preserved. Mistakes must be remembered. Superstition must be navigated with care. And though the city hums with life, he feels the quiet pulse of something larger, something unseen, guiding him to bear witness, to record, to endure. The bird flutters, wings brushing the thin morning air, tethered but alive, a quiet symbol of perseverance. The apprentice turns back to the parchment, quill poised. The master's eyes linger on him, a silent benediction, and the room fills with the muted resonance of beginnings, of cures attempted, of fear confronted, of a world slowly waking to the tenuous triumph of knowledge over chaos. And as dawn stretches its long fingers across the scriptorium, the apprentice writes, the ink flowing like lifeblood across vellum, tethered to a fate both uncertain and inexorably human. Outside, the city continues its waking cries. Inside, the delicate dance of hope and despair carries on, a secret kept between ink, root, and the quiet courage of one who seeks to heal in a world ruled by shadows. The smell of decaying herbs and fresh blood hangs like a shroud over the infirmary, thick and unyielding, pressing into every breath. The air is alive with suffering, a tangible weight that settles into the lungs, clinging to the skin like damp cloth. Patients lie under threadbare blankets, the fabric frayed and thin, each stitch a fragile attempt to ward off the cold that creeps along the stone floors. Their groans ripple through the room, low and guttural, blending with the occasional cough that rattles like bones against bone. Some eyes, half closed, stare into nothingness, while others dart wildly at the flicker of torchlight, haunted by fever and fear. Healers move among them, their faces set in grim lines, hands precise yet trembling. Sharp knives glint in torchlight, crude instruments that promise relief as much as they threaten pain. Fingers, dipped into unguents and pastes, hover above festering wounds before pressing down, coaxing flesh back into life, or at least postponing death. The ointments, a mix of crushed herbs, animal fats, and whispered prayers, carry both hope and peril, each touch a wager against infection, against the relentless cruelty of disease. Outside, the bell tower tolls with a hollow, accusing rhythm. Its echoes sweep over the cobbled streets, warning of death already arrived, of neighbors fallen silent in their homes, of carts drawn by gaunt horses carrying the weight of those who could no longer rise. The sound penetrates the infirmary walls, drumming in the chest of those who remain, a grim reminder that survival is never certain, that mercy is often absent in this world. A young girl sits huddled near the hearth, clutching a doll whose cloth is faded and torn, its painted eyes chipped and dull. Her fingers tighten around it, as though the ragged figure could shield her from the horrors surrounding her. She rocks slightly, humming a tune she learned in happier days. a melody swallowed almost instantly by the groans and whispers of the infirmary. Each note is a fragile defiance, a protest against the cold indifference that seeps through the walls and seeps into her bones. A healer approaches her, robes brushing against the uneven stone, the leather of worn sandals whispering across the floor. Fingers coated in salves hover near a burn along the girl's arm, the flesh red and angry beneath. The healer murmurs a prayer, words curling and twisting into the air, mingling with the scent of incense and rot. Each syllable is both a plea and a charm, an attempt to draw divine mercy into the hands of mortals who have none. For in this place, knowledge and faith are entwined in a desperate dance. Each ritual, each incision, each whispered blessing an effort to grasp life from the gaping jaws of death. Frost clings stubbornly to the window panes, crystallizing the light that struggles to enter, fracturing it into shards that scatter across the stone floor. The cold is patient and relentless, slipping beneath blankets and into open wounds, reminding all who linger here that the world outside does not pause for suffering. Even the heat of the hearth, sputtering and dim, fights a losing battle against the creeping chill. Outside, the streets are silent but for the occasional rattle of a cart or the bark of a stray dog. A world moving on while this one halts, suspended between life and decay. Perched atop the parapet, a raven watches. Its eyes, dark and unblinking, seem to measure the anguish below, silent and judgmental. The bird tilts its head, considering the fragile bodies that shuffle and writhe, the fevered faces turned skyward in silent plea. To it, the infirmary is a stage, every act of desperation laid bare, and yet there is no malice in its gaze, only the cold patience of one who understands inevitability. Life and death twist together here, inseparable. A dance performed on cobblestone and frozen air, watched by creatures for whom mortality is a curiosity rather than a terror. The healers move with ritualized precision. One dips a knife into boiling water, then slices a swollen abscess, smoke curling up to mingle with the incense hanging from the beams. Another chants softly, crossing herself over a fevered man, the words vibrating in the cold air. Each gesture is a promise and a question, a silent acknowledgement of the limits of human hands and knowledge. The sharp sting of antiseptic herbs is followed by a sigh of relief or a groan of new pain, a rhythm that continues until the day breaks or death claims its due. In the corner, a man murmurs a prayer for his wife, whose breath comes in short, trembling gasps. His fingers clutch hers, trying to lend strength he does not feel, whispering promises of survival that sound hollow even as he speaks them. Nearby, a child shakes, fever high, eyes glassy and wide. The healer dips a rag into a cool herb infusion and presses it to the child's forehead, murmuring, "Rest now, little one, the night will not last forever." But even as the words fall, the shadows seem to close in, pressing in from the stone walls, from the dark corners, from the spaces between life and the promise of oblivion. The torchlight flickers, throwing grotesque shadows against the walls, shadows that stretch and twist like fingers reaching for the living. Every breath is heavy, every movement calculated. Silence is punctuated only by the occasional scream, the slap of a bandage, the thud of a cart arriving at the gate. Outside, the bell tolls again, slower now, each peal a tolling for those already claimed, for the families who will not recognize their dead, for the young who clutch worn dolls and wonder why the world has turned so cruel. Yet amid the suffering, there is an odd persistence of hope. A healer's gentle hand, a whispered blessing, a child's quiet hum. All are threads woven into the fabric of endurance. Every life preserved, however briefly, is a testament to defiance. The rituals, the slashing of skin, the bitter taste of herbal pastes, the prayers and incantations, They are all part of the same fragile promise, that humans will confront fragility and even in their own limitations, seek to hold back the night. As dusk seeps into the infirmary, the frost on the windows deepens, painting the world outside in jagged patterns. The raven shifts atop the parapet, its dark feathers absorbing the last light, and the bell tolls once more, softer this time, a reminder that tomorrow will come, and with it new trials. The girl hugs her doll tighter, the healer smooths her hair, and the wounded breathe, some in relief, some in pain. The room is quiet, though not at peace, suspended between the cruelty of death and the fragile defiance of life. And in this balance, the story stretches forward, silent hands pressing salves, whispers of prayers, the frost etching its cold patterns on glass, and the raven watching. All are reminders that life persists, stubborn and delicate, that care and fear, faith and knowledge, mingle in a world where every breath is a victory, and every wound a testament to human courage. Here, in the quiet cruelty of medieval care, the struggle continues, and the world outside, indifferent and frozen, waits patiently for the next turn of fate. The wooden floors groan beneath hurried footsteps, each echo bouncing off the cold stone walls like the heartbeat of some slumbering giant. The air is thick with the tang of sweat, rotting bread, and spilt ale, a pungent reminder of the hunger, fever, and toil that plague every corner of the town. Torches flicker against the walls, their flames catching dust motes that float like tiny phantoms in the dim light, and the shadows twist and deepen in the corners, as if concealing secrets too dark to name. Here, in the narrow confines of the apothecary, the world feels suspended between the living and the dead, a fragile thread of breath and pulse stretched over centuries of fear. Shelves carved into the stone groan under the weight of jars and bottles, each containing powders, roots, and dried leaves that whisper promises of relief. Some jars hold powdered bones, the bleached remnants of ancestors or the unlucky, ground into the guise of medicine. Others cradle crushed roots that release faint, bitter scents when disturbed, the kind of smell that sticks to the skin long after the hands are washed. Each herb, each tincture, each carefully measured pinch of dust is a negotiation with forces that cannot be tamed. Nature, mortality, the unseen spirits of sickness and decay. The healer moves among them with deliberate care, a quiet authority honed from years of trial, error, and whispered rumor. A dark liquid is poured into a small, chipped bowl, its surface catching the torchlight in brief glints, like black water reflecting a fractured sky. Eyes, sharp and wary, dart toward every corner, as though shadows themselves could watch and judge. It is a dance of trust and suspicion, for in these walls, every act of healing carries the weight of potential terror. A misstep, a wrong ingredient, an unclean hand, could mean not just the loss of a patient, but the wrath of neighbors who see witchcraft in every shadow. Outside, a bell tolls for the dead, its hollow sound rolling through the streets and settling in the bones of those still alive. It is a rhythm of inevitability, marking the passage from hope to mourning, from warmth to cold stone. Within the apothecary, quiet sighs escape the lips of patients, their bodies betraying prayers unspoken. Fevered skin gleams with sweat, hands tremble in weak entreaty, and eyes glaze with the weight of suffering. Each human presence is a silent accusation. Can the healer keep death at bay, or is it already written in the pattern of their pulse, in the lines of their face, in the inevitable tilt of the skull beneath a thin sheet? A rusted key glints on the counter, catching the torchlight for a moment before slipping back into shadow. It is an invitation, or perhaps a warning, to the hidden chambers where remedies are forbidden, where experiments whisper of transgression and knowledge wrested from the boundaries of nature. The key is heavy with meaning. It promises secrets that could save or destroy, and in its cold iron, one feels the weight of human ambition pressed against the limits of mortality. The apothecary itself becomes a theater, each movement a performance on a stage where light and shadow are both props and participants. The healer's hands are steady but not unfeeling. A trembling palm reaches for a fevered forehead, the faint brush of skin conveying hope stronger than words. A murmur escapes, a prayer, a plea, a silent command that the body might relent, that the sickness might release its grip. The room watches in silence. Even as hope flickers, the corners remain patient, their shadows observing the precarious balance between life and death, between knowledge and superstition. Every breath is measured, every drip of liquid counted. In this quiet, every heartbeat becomes a drum, every sigh a bell. The smell of herbs mingles with the scent of human fragility. The metallic tang of blood from a careless cut, the acrid sting of fever-breaking skin, the faint rot of decay that no cleansing fire can fully erase. Smoke from the torch curls in the air, carrying these scents in spirals that rise and vanish, as if mocking the fleetingness of relief. Outside, wind presses against the wooden shutters, a cold insistence that the world beyond the apothecary continues. Hunger, plague, war, famine. While inside, the fragile illusion of control is all that separates salvation from despair. In the small bowl, the dark liquid ripples, reflecting more than candlelight. It mirrors the uncertainty of healing, the tension between known and unknown, between life extended and life denied. Each drop poured carries the weight of intention, of human will striving against the inevitable. The healer whispers a word over it, or perhaps the sound is merely the wind in the shutters. The line between ritual and superstition blurs. This is not medicine as science, but medicine as survival, a precarious art born from necessity, intuition, and fear. From somewhere in the back room, the faint clink of glass on stone echoes, a reminder that secrets reside here, locked away not just by iron and mortar, but by human knowledge too dangerous for daylight. Perhaps it is a vial of mercury, or powdered foxglove, or a recipe scrawled in trembling script that promises life in exchange for a price yet unnamed. Every sound, every shadow, every scent is a participant in the drama, lending urgency to the healer's careful choreography. The patient's sigh, the shuffle of feet, the scraping of a chair, all are notes in a symphony of survival. The hours stretch like shadows themselves, slow and deliberate. There is no distinction between night and day, only the persistence of illness, the fragility of bodies, and the unwavering dedication of hands that dare to intervene. Eyes, often weary, catch the smallest change. A cooling of skin, a flutter of pulse, the faint return of color to a cheek. These are victories small but monumental, moments when hope flares against the constant presence of death, a fragile candle against an encroaching night. And yet, even in triumph, the apothecary reminds one of mortality's unyielding claim. The rusted key, the hidden chambers, the jars of powders that resemble more bones than herbs, all hint at the limits of knowledge, the boundaries humans cannot cross. Each act of healing is also an acknowledgement of uncertainty, that the body may betray the soul, that spirits may linger in the air like mist, that even the most careful hands cannot outrun fate. Finally, the healer pauses, hands hovering over the small bowl, eyes scanning the room with a quiet reverence. Silence settles like a blanket, thick and heavy, carrying both relief and dread. The torch flickers once, twice, casting dancing shadows over the jars, the key, the trembling figures who wait and watch. Outside, the bell tolls again, a reminder that life and death march together, step for step. In that moment, the apothecary is not merely a room. It is a witness to humanity's desperate defiance, a stage where hope and terror perform a delicate, eternal dance. A patient's hand curls weakly around the healer's wrist, a silent acknowledgement of trust. The air is cool against fevered skin, a contrast to the heat of candles and bodies and boiling herbs. Somewhere beyond the walls, wind presses against the town, carrying the scent of earth, rain, and distant fires. And inside, in the flickering torchlight, in the quiet clink of glass and metal, life and death converse, negotiate, and occasionally relent. The apothecary exhales a quiet, measured breath, holding in its stone and shadow the fragile truth that to heal is also to confront fear, and that every act of mercy carries the shadow of mortality. The wooden floors groan again, and the healer moves toward the hidden door, the rusted key heavy in hand. Beyond it lies knowledge forbidden, remedies untested, and secrets that could illuminate or condemn. Yet for a moment, the room is still, caught between what is known and what is possible, between hope and the patient, inevitable darkness that waits for all. Outside, the wind whispers of storms to come, and the apothecary, ancient and weary, waits with patient vigilance, ready to receive the next soul who dares to seek its counsel. A candle guttered in the cold draft, its flame shivering like a living thing, throwing long, quivering shadows across the stone walls. The solitary surgeon sat hunched over his patient, eyes darkened by exhaustion, lips moving in a whispered litany that trembled between prayer and calculation. The room smelled of iron and damp straw, a scent that clung to the skin like a warning. Blood seeped into the floor, a vivid testament to life's precarious balance, and he worked with hands both steady and fearful, each movement deliberate, each cut a negotiation with mortality itself. The walls, slick with age and smoke, were lined with crude sketches. The human body reduced to lines and loops, a map of veins, bones, and organs drawn in reverent obsession. Some were exact, some guesses carved from observation and necessity, but all bore the same quiet intensity, a devotion to knowing what no one else dared to confront. He traced one sketch with a finger, as if touching the lifeblood captured in charcoal might grant insight, might grant mercy. Outside, the distant toll of a funeral bell cut through the marketplace's hum. It rose and fell like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant, reminding the living of what waits for all of them, unyielding and indifferent. A draft swept through the narrow window, ruffling loose strands of hair and carrying the faint brush of a bird's wing against the glass. For a moment, the surgeon's gaze lifted, caught by the fragile, impossible freedom just beyond the chamber. A freedom denied to those bound by flesh, by fear, by the silent oath to preserve what life remained. He inhaled sharply, smelling smoke and dust, and returned to the patient. A deep cut across the forearm gaped like a warning. The hand trembled as he reached for the scalpel, a thin, cold edge that could both heal and betray. Each incision demanded devotion and courage. Each stitch, each bandage was a prayer. His mind moved in tandem with his hands, recalling herbs and poultices, the careful balance of heat and pressure, the chant-like repetition of remedies learned from long-dead masters. Every ingredient carried memory. Willow bark for fever, honey for infection, crushed sage to ward off unseen poisons. The world outside was brutal, yet here, within the candlelit chamber, he wielded knowledge like a fragile shield. And still, he feared what knowledge could not conquer. The rot creeping silently beneath skin, the fever that would not relent, the soul that might falter even as the body clung stubbornly to life. The patient's labored breathing filled the small space, a slow rhythm that seemed to harmonize with the tolling bell. The surgeon leaned closer, lips brushing the wound in silent invocation, whispering words that had no place in scripture but were no less sacred. Pain flared in the air, sharp and metallic, and he flinched against it, tasting the scent of mortality like bitter wine. He reminded himself that every movement, every pulse of effort, was sacred, and yet the knowledge of his limits gnawed at him. One wrong motion, one hesitation, could unravel all hope, could usher a soul toward the darkness beyond the bell's toll. Time folded in on itself in that dim chamber. Shadows stretched across the straw-strewn floor like the fingers of unseen giants. The surgeon's reflection in a polished metal bowl wavered, distorted by flickering light. Was it the patient he saw reflected there or himself? The uncertainty weighed heavier than any physical burden. In that room, knowledge was both salvation and curse. Faith and fear coexisted in a delicate, trembling balance. A candle in a storm, a life poised between the surgeon's hands and the inevitability of death. Outside, the world went on in clamor and commerce. Children chased through muddy streets, their cries carried by wind that smelled of fish, smoke, and rain. Merchants shouted prices that mattered little to those within these walls, and the distant funeral bell marked a cadence all the same. Here, time was measured differently, by the heartbeat of a wounded arm, by the pulse beneath a bandaged chest, by the fleeting moments in which knowledge, hope, and mortality intersected. Time folded in on itself in that dim chamber. Shadows stretched across the straw-strewn floor like the fingers of unseen giants. The surgeon's reflection in a polished metal bowl wavered, distorted by flickering light. Was it the patient he saw reflected there or himself? The uncertainty weighed heavier than any physical burden. In that room, knowledge was both salvation and curse. Faith and fear coexisted in a delicate, trembling balance. A candle in a storm, a life poised between the surgeon's hands and the inevitability of death. Outside, the world went on in clamor and commerce. Children chased through muddy streets, their cries carried by wind that smelled of fish, smoke, and rain. Merchants shouted prices that mattered little to those within these walls, and the distant funeral bell marked a cadence all the same. Here, time was measured differently, by the heartbeat of a wounded arm, by the pulse beneath a bandaged chest, by the fleeting moments in which knowledge, hope, and mortality intersected. He paused, letting the scalpel rest on the edge of the table, his hand hovering above the wound as if waiting for a sign. The candle guttered again, and for a brief moment, the room plunged into near darkness. In that suspended interval, the surgeon saw more than the patient, more than blood or straw or soot. He saw the fragility of all things, the impermanence of flesh, the tenuous grip of life, the whisper of freedom outside these walls. A bird's shadow swept across the floor, and he imagined wings unfolding, imagined a world where suffering could be unburdened, imagined mercy unbound by the human hand. Then the light returned, stubborn and unwavering. The scalpel moved again, precise and deliberate. Fingers traced the wound, pressed herbs into bleeding flesh, bound it tightly with linen soaked in oils. The work was ritual, sacred, and terrifying in equal measure. Each stitch seemed to hold the patient's soul as much as the flesh, each motion a bridge between fear and hope, between what was known and what remained forever uncertain. Minutes stretched into hours, yet the surgeon did not notice. His eyes traced the walls, the sketches, the shadows, all evidence of humanity's ceaseless grappling with death and survival. The candle burned low, the flame threatening to vanish, and he realized that, like the light, life was fragile, temporary, and impossible to control. Only care, only devotion, only the willingness to confront terror head-on could guide one through these darkened corridors of existence. Outside, the bell's toll ceased, replaced by a silence that seemed almost conspiratorial. The surgeon leaned back, exhausted but vigilant, observing the patient's shallow rise and fall. The air was still now, heavy with incense, iron, and sweat. He allowed himself a moment to imagine the world beyond these walls. The wind over fields, the sun on stone, the fleeting joy of freedom as the bird had shown him. And yet he returned immediately to the work, to the sacred, terrible task that had no end. To hold life in fragile hands, to wrest it from darkness, to offer solace where fear threatened to dominate. As he gathered his tools and extinguished the candle, a shadow lingered in the corner, a reminder that even in small triumphs, death watched patiently. The sketches on the wall seemed to pulse in the dim light, veins and bones whispering secrets of suffering, survival, and the mysteries that humans dared to confront. The surgeon's lips moved in the final, silent litany of the night, a prayer for life, for knowledge, for courage to continue. And outside, the first hints of dawn crept across the rooftops, carrying the promise of another day where fear, devotion, and the fragile hope of healing would meet again. In that quiet, heavy moment, the world felt both vast and confined. The surgeon stepped away from the patient, leaving the shadows and the blood behind, yet carrying their weight within him. Every life saved was a defiance, every death a lesson, and every heartbeat a fragile triumph over the darkness. Beyond the chamber, the marketplace would awaken, and the world would demand its due. But within, in the small room of flickering candlelight, the struggle had been intimate, elemental, eternal. And so the surgeon prepared for the next day, the next incision, the next encounter with mortality itself. His hands steady, his faith trembling, his heart full of the quiet knowledge that life, however fleeting, was worth every sacrifice. The scent of burning rosemary drifts through the infirmary, mingling with the metallic tang of blood that hangs heavy in the air. Smoke curls in slow, lazy spirals, blurring the lines between torchlight and shadow, as hooded figures move with careful urgency. Each footstep is muffled on the stone floor, each whisper a tremor of hope or fear. The healer's hands are both instruments and prayers. They press, they bind, they sprinkle crushed roots, and they murmur names of saints with trembling devotion, as if the invocations themselves could stitch flesh and spirit alike. Candlelight flickers across worn faces, catching in hollowed eyes, illuminating both the weight of knowledge and the tremor of doubt. Wooden pegs line the walls, crowded with bundles of dried herbs, animal bones bleached pale with time, and jars containing the remnants of failed experiments. A silent testament to centuries of desperation. Each fragment tells a story, a whisper of life clawed back from the edge or lost entirely. The infirmary is a stage for ritual and science, a theater where every act of care is steeped in uncertainty. There is precision here, yes, but also superstition, fear, and a strange reverence for forces unseen. The healers move with the rhythm of the sickroom, balancing on the fragile thread between remedy and harm, their hearts beating against the ever-present shadow of mortality. Outside, frost clings to the steep gables, sparkling coldly in the weak light of dawn. It creeps into the seams of doors, into the unsealed cracks of window panes, and whispers to those inside that the world is indifferent. The muffled cries of children drift in from nearby quarters, the fragile pulse of life echoing against the thick, damp walls. Some are sick, some merely hungry, all caught in the vast machinery of survival, their small bodies swaying like reeds in a storm. Every sound, every cough, every whimper is amplified in the stillness of the infirmary, a reminder that care here is measured in breaths, not triumphs. A bell tolls somewhere in the distance, hollow and relentless. Its resonance carries through the town, marking time in a rhythm that mocks those trapped within these walls. To the healers, it is both a reminder and a threat. Each toll signals the march of hours, the relentless advance of disease, and the unyielding passage of fate. And yet, life persists. Every touch, every poultice applied, every whispered prayer, is an act of defiance against the cruelty of chance, a fragile assertion that the pulse of hope, however dim, can endure. One healer kneels beside a patient, a boy no older than 10, his cheeks flushed with fever, eyes wide and pleading. The healer's hands hover over the child's chest, pressing, prodding, feeling for the irregular beat beneath the thin skin. "Saints guide you," she whispers, the words both an invocation and a confession of uncertainty. She dips her fingers into a mixture of crushed yarrow and wine, the bitter smell rising like incense, and applies it to the boy's forehead. The boy shudders, and she murmurs again, stroking his hair with the gentlest of touches, the only softness in a room thick with fear. The walls themselves seem to breathe, shadows twisting and stretching as if alive. In the corners, rats scuttle unseen, their tiny claws scratching across the cold stone. Occasionally, the metallic scrape of a key or the creak of an old hinge punctuates the silence, suggesting secrets hidden behind doors, medicines locked away, horrors of failure tucked in cupboards like forbidden knowledge. Every movement is charged with tension, every glance a calculation. For in this infirmary, misstep and accident are more than inconvenient, they are deadly. Healers pause, exchanging brief looks. One catches another's eye, and in that silent acknowledgement, centuries of accumulated knowledge pass between them. A combination of learned technique, hard-won intuition, and whispered legends of saints' miracles. There is no room for doubt, yet doubt persists. Every moment is a balance between compassion and pragmatism, between the art of healing and the inevitability of decay. A mother clutches her child in trembling arms, whispering the boy's name, tears freezing along the edges of her shawl. She watches as the healers work, part prayer, part science, all desperation. The smell of burning herbs mixes with something fouler, sweat, fear, sickness, forming a thick, almost tangible atmosphere. Torches sputter, their flames licking the walls, casting the room into fleeting darkness. Shadows twist into grotesque shapes, hinting at demons or specters, or perhaps only reflecting the fears harbored in every human heart present. Each sound, the scraping of a bowl, the whisper of fabric, the stifled moan of a patient, resonates like a drumbeat, marking the fragile rhythm of life in the room. A man with a long, unkempt beard bends over a table where a young woman lies, her arm bandaged with strips of linen soaked in oils and herbs. "Breathe," he says quietly, more to himself than to her, tracing the line of her pulse with reverent fingers. The woman's eyes flutter, reflecting the torchlight like two pools of liquid amber. For a moment, time hangs suspended, caught between the eternity of suffering and the fleeting miracle of survival. The healer dips into a jar of powdered bark, inhaling the pungent scent, and sprinkles it over the wound. He mutters a name, an incantation, a hope, a plea, and the woman shifts slightly, a small, tremulous sign of life, fragile as frost on a winter morning. The infirmary is a crucible of the human condition, a place where life and death dance in close embrace. Here, knowledge is ritual, touch is medicine, and every heartbeat is a victory against oblivion. The air vibrates with the tension of mortality, yet also with the quiet insistence of care, an unspoken testament to the resilience of those who will not let life go quietly. And beyond the walls, the world continues, indifferent to suffering yet bound by it. The frost glints on distant roofs, the bell tolls again, and the faint rustle of life stirs in hidden places. Each healer, each patient, each whispered prayer is a thread in the vast, unbroken tapestry of existence, weaving stories of survival, despair, and hope. In this room, amid smoke, blood, and the scent of rosemary, the fragile miracle of life persists, flickering, trembling, yet refusing to be extinguished. As night falls, the torchlight softens, shadows lengthen, and the stirrings of the infirmary slow to a careful rhythm. The healers step back, eyes heavy but vigilant, listening to the quiet cries that echo through the stone corridors. Somewhere, a rat scurries across the floor. Somewhere, a fevered child dreams of open fields and sunlight. The air is thick with the smell of herbs, iron, and smoke, a fragrant testament to both human ingenuity and the stubbornness of mortality. And in that suspended silence, the room seems to hold its breath, waiting, always waiting, for the next chapter of life to unfold. Outside, the frost gleams under the pale light of dawn. The bell tolls one final time before the day begins anew, its resonance carrying into the distance. The infirmary exhales a quiet sigh, the shadows retreat, and yet, just beyond the reach of candlelight, the hidden horrors of disease, despair, and death linger, waiting to test the courage, skill, and faith of those who dare confront them. In the heart of medieval medicine, the line between salvation and oblivion remains perilously thin, and every act of care is both defiance and devotion. Moonlight slants through narrow, arched windows, slipping past the grime and dust that coat centuries of stone. Its pale fingers scatter across a rough-hewn table, where mortars, knives, and glass vials catch the glow in fractured reflections. Each vessel cradles a secret, a liquid to soothe fever, a powder to staunch bleeding, a tincture that could cure or kill. The air is thick, almost viscous, carrying the scent of damp stone, unwashed bodies, and the faint, stubborn perfume of herbs crushed and simmered for hours. A young boy coughs, sharp and ragged, the sound bouncing off walls that have borne witness to countless suffering souls. It echoes like a warning, a reminder of the fragility of life in this harsh, unforgiving age. In the corner, coiled rope rests beside a bundle of cloth, silent witnesses to restraint, to survival strategies both mundane and desperate. Their presence speaks of human endurance measured against fear, against the chaos of sickness, and against the sometimes cruel cruelty of those who guard this place of healing with suspicion. Shadows twist and writhe across the ceiling, dancing to the rhythm of flickering candle flames. They stretch and shrink with each tremor of the wick, as if the room itself breathes with anxiety. The healer moves among these shadows with deliberate grace, fingers tracing the rims of cups, pressing powders between palms, inhaling the faint, acrid aroma of boiling roots. Each motion carries weight. A wrong gesture, a mismeasured pinch, a momentary hesitation, and the balance tips between life and death. She pauses, hands suspended over a glass vial, and the room holds its breath with her. The boy's cough slices the silence once more, harsh and unrelenting. Her eyes, dark and steady, flick to him, not with panic, but with recognition of the thin, fragile thread that separates survival from surrender. There is an intimacy here, a secret communion with suffering. She knows the language of groans, of fevered moans, of gasps for air that betray more than illness. They reveal fear, shame, and stubborn resilience. A mother whispers prayers beneath her breath, clutching a bundle of threadbare cloth around a trembling child, offering comfort she cannot measure in herbs or potions. The healer leans closer, inhaling the mingled scents of sweat and salve, and chooses a mixture. 1 part root, 2 parts distilled water, a tincture of hope tempered by bitter caution. Each droplet she administers is a silent act of defiance against the cruel ignorance of the world outside. The candle flames catch in her eyes, reflecting not just determination but exhaustion. The long nights, the the ceaseless vigil, the awareness that in this realm of shadows, knowledge is both precious and perilous. Outside, the wind presses against the stone walls, carrying the cries of distant animals, the rattling of shutters, and the faint, mournful whistle of a winter storm yet to arrive. Inside, the healer's breath is steady, ritualistic. She whispers names under her breath, old and forgotten words of power, of supplication, of quiet magic. Perhaps it is superstition. Perhaps it is the rhythm of the human need to act when powerless, to grasp at meaning when faced with the incomprehensible cruelty of disease and death. A vial shatters. A sharp tinkle of glass, sudden and jarring, cuts through the room. The boy starts, coughing harder now, and the mother gasps, pressing him to her chest. The healer's hand moves with swift precision, sweeping shards aside, stirring the mixture she had prepared as though nothing had changed. This is the dance she has learned. Calamity, interrupted by control. Chaos, tempered by knowledge born of countless failures and rare successes. Each action is a negotiation with mortality itself, a plea that her efforts may tip the scales, if only slightly, in favor of life. Time behaves strangely here. Minutes stretch into hours, each heartbeat magnified in the silence between coughs, between whispered prayers, between the scrape of a knife against stone. She pauses again, hand hovering over the boy's pale arm, feeling the faint pulse beneath skin as thin as parchment. His eyes meet hers, wide and frightened, and in that moment, the weight of her duty settles heavy upon her shoulders. This is the world she inhabits, a realm where hope and despair are measured in pinches of herb and drops of tincture, where every breath drawn is both victory and gamble, and where the boundaries between healer and witness, savior and mourner, blur into a single relentless struggle. Outside, shadows gather, deepening in corners, creeping along walls as if drawn by the same unseen forces that govern sickness, fear, and death. Inside, the candlelight dances across jars of powders and liquids, across coiled ropes and folded cloths. The healer's hands move again, steady, methodical, tracing circles in the air before pressing fingers into the boy's skin. The room hums with a quiet intensity, the faint hiss of steam, the soft clink of glass, the occasional sigh of relief or murmur of fear. It is a chamber suspended between worlds, the tangible and the invisible, life and death, knowledge and superstition. A moment passes. The boy's cough subsides, leaving only shallow, trembling breaths. The mother exhales in quiet astonishment, pressing her forehead to his hair. The healer straightens, sensing the fragile victory, and allows herself a brief pause. In this pause, she surveys the room. The mortars dusted with remnants of crushed herbs, the knives dulled and cleaned from use, the vials filled with potions that may yet hold miracles. Each object carries the imprint of human effort, of desperate ingenuity, of minds striving to bend an indifferent world toward mercy. And yet, there is no triumph here, only endurance. The night stretches on, moonlight sliding across the table and walls like a pale river. The shadows gather once more, heavier now, hinting at the darkness that waits beyond these walls. Unseen sicknesses, the cruelty of fear, the inexorable approach of winter and death. Still, the healer works, steadfast, each movement a quiet rebellion against the weight of mortality. Her lips move in soft chants, almost a whisper, almost a prayer, as she tends the living and whispers to the dead, bound by an unspoken covenant with life itself. In the corner, the ropes lie still, the cloths folded yet tense with promise, silent witnesses to the fragility of human endurance. Outside, the wind moans through stone corridors, carrying the echoes of distant cries. Inside, the healer's shadow stretches long, bending across the walls, reaching toward the boy who rests at last, eyes closed, chest rising and falling with the rhythm of tentative hope. Each flicker of candlelight, each subtle gesture, each fragile heartbeat is a testament that in a world governed by fear, superstition, and unseen dangers, human hands can still craft sanctuaries of care. As the night deepens, the moonlight recedes from the table, leaving only the faint glow of embers and candle flames. The room exhales its quiet tension, holding the promise and peril of tomorrow in balance. The healer leans back, fingers brushing the rim of a cup once more, tracing the line between cure and poison, knowledge and mystery. And in that delicate equilibrium, in that stillness laden with history and sorrow, the story of endurance continues. A story written not in chronicles, but in the sweat, tears, and silent courage of those who walk the shadowed corridors of life and death. The boy stirs slightly, a faint whimper escaping him. The candle flickers, and the shadows seem to gather closer, as if drawing the audience deeper into the hidden world of medieval healing. A world of pain and ingenuity, of quiet heroism and relentless dread, where every breath, every drop of tincture, every whispered prayer holds the weight of eternity. And as dawn waits beyond the walls, a pale promise, the healer turns her attention to the next struggle, to the next fragile life, and the cinematic descent into the hidden horrors and desperate ingenuity of this world stretches onward, unbroken, unrelenting, yet impossible to look away from.